Every time someone disrespects you, ignores you, mocks you, and you react, you've already lost. You think you're defending your worth, but you're actually handing it over. Why does one comment ruin your whole day? Why does silence from someone else echo so loudly in your mind? Because deep down, you're not in control. Your emotions are, and the world knows it. They press, and you bleed. They provoke, and you dance. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not them. It's you. It's the part of you that still craves recognition, still fears judgment, still burns when someone doesn't play by the script you wrote in your head. The Stoics knew this centuries ago. They taught that peace isn't found by fixing the world. It's found by freeing yourself from the illusion that the world owes you anything. If you're tired of being pulled apart by every little thing, maybe it's time to learn how to hold yourself together. If that hits somewhere deep, and you know you're ready to rebuild from the inside out, consider subscribing, because you deserve a mind that doesn't tremble every time the world shakes. It always feels like it starts out there, doesn't it? A certain look, a sharp word, someone being late, cutting you off, talking over you, and in that instant, your whole body tightens. Your mind tells a story, and your chest begins to burn. But what if that flame wasn't sparked by them at all? What if the anger that rises isn't a reaction to reality, but a reaction to the story you're attached to? The idea that they should have behaved differently, spoken more respectfully, treated you like you expected. That's where the fire begins. Not with what they did, but with what you wanted them to do and didn't get. The pain isn't coming from the world. It's coming from the gap between what happened and what you thought should have happened. That gap is where all suffering begins. That's the illusion of offense, the belief that other people are responsible for your emotional state. That illusion keeps you reactive, always on edge, always vulnerable to the next unexpected comment, the next silent treatment, the next failed promise. But the Stoics knew better. They understood that it's not the event that disturbs you, it's your opinion about the event. It's the meaning you slap onto it without even realizing it. You're not upset that someone cancelled plans. You're upset because you believe it means you're not important. You're not angry that someone raised their voice. You're angry because you believe it means they don't respect you. But what if you didn't rush to interpret everything as an attack? What if you could separate the event from the meaning? You'd see how little power those moments actually have. And this is the hard part, because we've been trained since childhood to believe that our emotions are caused by others. He made me mad. She ruined my day. But when you look closely, no one can make you feel anything unless you let them. Emotions aren't injected into you from the outside. They're built from within, based on how you process what happens. It's a bitter truth, because it means responsibility is yours, but it's also the doorway to freedom. Because if no one can cause your anger, then no one can control you either. That's real power. You can be unshaken not because people finally behave, but because you no longer depend on their behavior to feel stable. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's not just a comforting phrase. It's a reminder that the battlefield isn't out there. It's in here. The world doesn't need to change for you to find peace. You just have to stop giving the world so much say in how you feel. Look at how it unfolds. Someone says something rude. Instantly, your brain takes it and runs. How dare they? They don't see my value. I need to say something back. But what actually happened? Words, sounds from someone else's mouth, the meaning, the insult, the rage, those are all added by your mind. If you didn't have a belief about what they should say, their words wouldn't land at all. You wouldn't even flinch. It's like watching someone yell in a language you don't understand. It doesn't touch you. That's the potential of a trained mind. Not to be numb, but to be so clear that you don't confuse noise for threat. You don't make every discomfort a crisis. You let life unfold as it will, and you meet it with your own clarity instead of your reactions. And it's not about pretending things don't bother you. It's about asking yourself, why does this bother me? What belief do I have about this moment that makes me feel insulted or offended? You'll often find that it's not the person who hurt you. It's your image of who they were supposed to be. A friend who doesn't show up, a partner who doesn't understand, a stranger who doesn't show respect. You aren't hurt by the truth. You're hurt by the dream, the version of them you built in your mind, and that's where suffering grows. We're rarely wounded by what is. We're wounded by what we imagined would be. So the path forward isn't to avoid people or control every situation. It's to start watching your expectations, catch them in the act. Notice how quickly your mind creates a version of what should happen and how furious it gets when life refuses to obey. That's where anger lives, not in the world, but in resistance to the world. And every time you believe that someone else is responsible for your peace, you've handed it away. You've told the world, you can decide how I feel, but you don't have to live like that anymore. This shift won't happen overnight. You'll still get triggered. You'll still feel that sting in your chest, the heat in your face. But if you can pause, just for a moment, and ask, what story am I telling myself right now? You'll start to see through the illusion. You'll realize you're not a puppet to your emotions. You're the one holding the strings. It's not about suppressing your anger. It's about not being fooled by it. Because anger always says, they did this to me. But wisdom always answers, I chose to respond this way. You are not weak for feeling hurt, but you stay weak when you let that feeling dictate your actions. The stronger path is to look inward, to question the reaction, to sit with the discomfort until it dissolves. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your anger is not a flaw. It's a flashlight. It's showing you where you've tied your peace to someone else's behavior, and every time you see that clearly, you reclaim a piece of your mind. This is the beginning of emotional strength, not control over others, but mastery of your own responses. The world will keep moving. People will keep disappointing, surprising, provoking, but you don't have to move with them. You can remain rooted. You can become the kind of person who hears, who sees, who feels, and stays unshaken. Not because you're disconnected, but because you've connected so deeply to yourself that nothing external can pull you apart. That's not denial, that's discipline, and that's where your real power lives. Everyone tells you that reacting means you're strong, that when someone crosses a line and you snap back, you've won. That when you raise your voice, when you walk out, when you send the angry text, you're proving something, that you're not to be messed with, that you're standing up for yourself. But if you really pay attention, if you're brutally honest with yourself, you'll see the truth hiding underneath the noise. Most reactions aren't strength, they're habits, the same emotional loop replaying itself over and over again. Someone presses the button and you light up like a fuse. You don't think, you don't pause, you just go. And then later, when the dust settles, you call it justified. But was it? Or did you once again hand the keys of your mind to someone else and let them drive it straight into chaos? The problem is, reaction feels powerful in the moment. That surge in your chest, that burst of adrenaline, it gives you the illusion that you're in control. But reaction is the opposite of control. It's being controlled. It's letting someone else's behavior dictate your behavior. It's turning your nervous system into a remote that anyone can press. And the more you do it, the more natural it feels. That's how addiction works. Your brain gets used to the cycle. Someone disrespects you, you react. Someone ignores you, you spiral. Someone makes a comment, you take the bait. And every time it happens, it carves the pattern a little deeper. You think you're choosing, but you're just repeating. Epictetus warned us about this when he said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." If your peace crumbles every time you're tested, you're not free. You're owned by your reactions. So what does it mean to be free from reaction? It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop obeying. You still notice the anger. You still feel the heat crawl up your spine, your jaw tighten, your hands itch to respond, but you don't move. Not yet. You let the feeling rise, and you meet it with awareness, not action. That's where your strength lives, in the space between the stimulus and the response. Most people never enter that space. They react before they even realize what they're reacting to. But when you learn to pause, even for just a moment, you interrupt the cycle. You reclaim your mind. You remember that just because something provokes you doesn't mean it deserves your energy. Not everything that triggers you is worth your attention. Think about the last time you got angry, really angry. Maybe someone insulted you, or they ignored your message, or they looked at you a certain way. How long did that moment live inside your head? An hour? A day? Longer? And what did it cost you? Your focus, your clarity, your sleep. That's the price of reaction. It doesn't just steal your peace in the moment. It follows you. It rewrites the tone of your entire day. You could have used that energy to build something, to connect, to reflect, to rest. But instead it was burned away on something you probably don't even remember clearly now. Reaction is expensive, and most of us are going broke. There's also a strange ego in reaction, a part of you that believes, if I don't respond, they'll think I'm soft. If I don't defend myself, they'll think they're right. But here's the truth most people can't accept. Letting someone believe they've won is sometimes the greatest victory, because you're not reacting to prove your worth anymore. You already know it. You're not defending your image. You've outgrown the need to explain who you are. When your value is internal, their words don't stick. They bounce off. They dissolve. And what's left is silence. Not empty silence, but powerful, intentional stillness. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about not being enslaved by it. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people believe they're just emotional or hot-tempered, as if it's a trait they were born with. But what if those reactions are just unconscious programs running the show? What if you could unlearn them the same way you learned them? Through repetition, through awareness, through patience. That's where real growth begins. Not when you never get triggered, but when getting triggered doesn't mean you lose yourself. And that's the shift. From automatic to intentional, from puppet to master, from noise to control. You realize that reacting doesn't make you strong, it makes you predictable, and predictability is a weakness. Anyone who knows your buttons can press them, but when you become unreadable, when your peace isn't up for grabs, you stop being a target. You stop being entertainment for the emotionally unstable. You become someone who doesn't play the game at all, and the game falls apart without you. This kind of mastery takes time. It takes awareness. It takes slipping up, getting pulled in, and then catching yourself quicker next time. But every time you hold the line, every time you pause instead of reacting, you build a new identity. One that isn't governed by chaos, but anchored in calm. One that doesn't dance to the tune of provocation, but moves only when it chooses. That's what it means to reclaim control, not just of your emotions, but of your life. Because the fewer things that own your reaction, the more energy you have for what really matters, and that's a life worth building. One pause at a time. It doesn't take much to trigger this internal alarm. a look, a comment, a pause in conversation that feels just a little too long, a message left unread, and you feel it immediately, this subtle panic that you've been diminished somehow, that someone sees you as less than you want to be seen, and from that place of insecurity, anger is born. But here's the trap. If your peace depends on your image being perfectly held up by the opinions of others, you've given your power away. You've made your calm conditional on things you can never control. The world will always misinterpret, underestimate, and misjudge you. That's not a problem. The real problem is believing you have to chase every misunderstanding to fix it. That every time someone gets you wrong, you need to correct them. That every time your name is spoken poorly, you need to defend it. But the truth is, peace doesn't live in being understood. It lives in being unshaken, even when you're misunderstood. The ego's need for validation is endless. It's hungry all the time. It doesn't matter how much recognition you get. There's always someone who will see you in a smaller way, and your ego will beg you to fight that, to argue, to explain, to perform your value until they finally agree. But even if they do, the satisfaction doesn't last, because it was never about truth. It was about ego. And ego feeds on conflict. It convinces you that every disagreement is a threat, that every challenge to your image is a battle that must be won. But winning in that space never leads to freedom. It leads to exhaustion. The more you defend your identity, the more fragile it becomes. Imagine how different life would be if you didn't need people to see you a certain way. If you could be content with being underestimated, misread, or even disliked without it disturbing your inner stability. That's not apathy, that's maturity, that's strength. Epictetus once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Most people would never say that out loud, but the fear of being seen that way runs deep. It's why we argue when someone questions our knowledge, why we interrupt to prove we know more, why we can't sit in silence when we feel dismissed. But if you can learn to let go of that fear, something incredible happens. You gain access to a kind of peace that no one can take from you, because your self-worth is no longer up for debate. This doesn't mean you allow disrespect. It means you choose how you respond to it. There's a big difference between setting boundaries and defending your ego. One protects your space, the other tries to protect your story. One is grounded, the other is reactive, and most of what we call boundaries are just ego dressed in armor. Real strength is when you can walk away not because you're angry, but because you no longer find value in explaining yourself. When you know who you are so deeply that someone's misunderstanding feels like background noise instead of a personal threat. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to be seen the right way. How many conversations you've replayed, how many texts you've written and rewritten, how many moments you've ruined for yourself because your mind was caught in the web of image management. The ego says, "Don't let them think that about you." But your higher self whispers, "What they think has nothing to do with your truth." That shift is powerful. It's the moment you stop living as a reaction to how others perceive you and start living from a calm, centered place that doesn't need permission to exist. Carl Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we avoid become the very things that control us. The ego avoids weakness, foolishness, vulnerability. It hides those things in the dark and fights like a wild animal when they're brought to the light. But what if you could embrace those shadows instead of fearing them? What if someone thinking you're wrong or small or foolish didn't trigger a battle inside you, but invited curiosity or silence or even a quiet smile? That's not weakness. That's evolution. You begin to feel compassion for those who try to hurt you, not because you've given up, but because you've outgrown the need to be on their level. You no longer need to match their energy because you're no longer operating from the same fragile frame. There's a weight that comes with needing to be understood all the time, a constant pressure to correct, to justify, to perform. But the moment you set that weight down, you begin to feel what real self-respect feels like. It's not about shouting who you are. It's about knowing who you are and letting your presence do the rest. And that knowing, that stillness, that's what silences the noise. Not because the world stops speaking, but because you no longer need to listen to what doesn't align with truth. And your truth doesn't need defending. It needs living, quietly, steadily, and without ego. Some people don't speak to communicate, they speak to provoke. Their words are weapons, not tools. Their tone is a trap, not a bridge. And when they throw those verbal jabs, they're not hoping for clarity. They're hoping for chaos. What they want is a reaction, not because they need your opinion, but because they feed on your energy. When you bite, you give them what they want. When you fight, you give them power. But silence, real, calm, composed silence, is something they never expect. It confuses them. It unsettles them. It holds up a mirror they can't escape, because in that stillness, their noise echoes back at them. And without your reaction to distract them, they have no choice but to face the source of their own unrest. Most people misunderstand what silence really is. They think it's weakness, that if you don't respond, you've accepted defeat, that if you walk away, you've surrendered. But silence isn't surrender. It's strategy, it's presence, it's control. Anyone can yell back, anyone can slam the door, type the long message, launch the insult. That takes no discipline. But to feel the pull to respond and still choose not to, that's mastery, that's power. Because true power doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a mic. It knows what it is and moves only when necessary. Anything more than that becomes theater. And if your strength depends on proving it, it's not strength at all. It's insecurity dressed in noise. It's hard at first. When someone crosses a line, the instinct to defend yourself rises fast. The urge to set the record straight, to clap back, to make them feel what they made you feel. But in those moments, you have to ask, what am I really fighting for? Is it justice or validation? Is it clarity or control? Often it's not about what they did, it's about how they made you feel, and we try to fix that feeling by changing them. But they're not yours to fix. And the moment you chase their attention, their apology, their correction, you place your peace in their hands. That's not justice, that's dependency. Real peace doesn't come from their silence, it comes from yours. Silence, when chosen with intention, becomes a form of emotional self-respect. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about knowing which battles are beneath you. Not because they're unimportant, but because your peace is more valuable than your pride. Seneca once wrote, "A great mind becomes a great fortune." That fortune isn't money or fame, it's stillness, clarity, strength that doesn't shout. Stillness is a kind of wealth that can't be stolen. And in a world obsessed with noise, the quiet ones stand out, not because they demand attention, but because they don't need it. You'll notice something strange when you start practicing this kind of calm. People will begin testing you more, not less. They'll say things just to see if you'll break. They'll poke at your silence, not because they're brave, but because your self-control challenges their instability. It makes them uncomfortable, and people hate being uncomfortable, so they'll try to drag you into the same chaos they're drowning in, hoping you'll flail too. But if you can stay still, even when your ego begs for a response, something powerful shifts. You no longer match their energy. You control the atmosphere. You stop being pulled and start becoming the one who anchors. Carl Jung believed that what we resist persists. When we resist being misunderstood, we stay trapped in the loop of needing to explain. When we resist the discomfort of silence, we end up filling it with noise that weakens us. But when we accept that not everything must be responded to, we begin to reclaim our energy. We stop reacting and start observing. And in that space, we realize how little power others actually have unless we hand it to them. Silence then becomes a boundary, a way of saying, "I hear you, but I choose not to participate in this." That choice is what separates reaction from response, weakness from wisdom. You won't get it perfect every time. There will be moments when you slip, when you say too much, when you explain yourself to someone who doesn't care to understand. But every time you return to stillness, you reinforce the new pattern. You teach your mind that peace isn't something that needs defending. It just needs protecting. And sometimes protection looks like a breath instead of a word, a pause instead of a comeback, a closed mouth instead of an open wound. Eventually, silence becomes your default. Not because you're disconnected, but because you've learned that loudness rarely changes minds, that arguments often create distance, not clarity, and that those who truly see you don't need explanations. The rest will see whatever their mind is already prepared to believe. Let them. You don't need to carry their confusion. You don't need to meet them where they are just to prove you're above them. The most dignified thing you can do is stay still while others unravel around you. Because it's not your job to correct every perspective, only to live from one that brings you peace. And peace is quiet. It doesn't perform. It doesn't fight for attention. It simply exists. Like water in a deep well, calm, clear, undisturbed. You can visit it whenever you choose, but no one else can poison it unless you let them. And when people come with their storms, their noise, their chaos, you no longer open the door. You don't yell back through it. You don't throw anything at it. You just let it knock and pass. Because the silence that comes from strength is not empty. It's full of everything they wish they could control in you, but can't. People often confuse detachment with apathy. They think it means turning your heart off, walking through life untouched, uncaring, numb to everything and everyone. But that's not detachment. That's escape. True detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being ruled by what you feel. It's not a wall. It's a window, clear and calm. You still see, you still sense, you still hurt, and you still love. But you do it without drowning in it. You make space between the feeling and the reaction. You learn to observe before you act. That space is where your strength grows. So much of our suffering comes from being swept up in waves we never pause to look at. We feel something sharp, and we immediately respond, without asking why it's there. But imagine if you paused instead, not to suppress, not to deny, but to understand. What is this feeling trying to tell me? Is it about this moment, or is it about something older, something I've carried for years without noticing? That's the gift of detachment. It slows everything down just enough for you to hear what your emotions are really saying before they take the wheel. You stop being a slave to impulse. You stop living on edge. Most people think reacting quickly shows confidence, but it often shows fear. It shows how badly we want to avoid sitting with discomfort, how quickly we want to silence anything that feels threatening. But growth doesn't happen in that speed. It happens in the pause. It happens in the quiet moment where you feel the discomfort rise, and instead of running, you lean in. We live in a culture that rewards dramatics. The louder the outrage, the more attention it gets. The more reactive you are, the more you seem real or passionate. But real passion doesn't flail, it focuses. Real power doesn't scream, it chooses. Detachment isn't emptiness, it's the ability to respond instead of react. It's clarity. It's strength under pressure. It's when you can hold your emotional fire in your hands without burning yourself or anyone else. That kind of control is rare. That kind of peace is earned. There's also a hidden fear in many people when it comes to detachment. The fear that if I don't react, people will think I don't care. That if I stay calm, I'll be seen as weak, cold, distant. But here's the truth. People might misread your silence, but they will never mistake your self-possession. They'll notice when you don't fall into the trap, when you stay calm while others spin. They might not say it, but they'll feel it. And slowly, they'll learn that their chaos has no grip on you, that your emotions are yours, not something for them to pull like strings. And this isn't about being better than anyone else. It's not superiority, it's stability. It's emotional maturity. When you stop reacting to everything, you start responding to what actually matters. Not every opinion is worth your breath. Not every argument is worth your peace. Not every invitation to chaos needs to be accepted. Detachment teaches you to be selective with your energy, to invest it, not leak it, to place it where it grows something, not just where it burns. It's easy to mistake this kind of self-discipline for detachment in the unhealthy sense, but the key difference is intention. Detachment from a place of fear avoids connection. Detachment from a place of strength deepens it, because now you're not entering relationships to complete yourself or defend yourself. You're coming in whole. You're offering your presence, not your dependency. That's the version of you people can actually feel safe around, because you're not reacting out of old wounds. You're responding with awareness. This is emotional mastery, not perfection, not suppression, but the ability to feel fully without being consumed, the ability to stay connected to your inner world while interacting with the outer one. You still care deeply, but now you care wisely. You no longer let someone else's behavior decide the shape of your day. You choose that. You no longer chase closure from those who don't understand you. You offer yourself peace and let them keep their misunderstandings. That's what real freedom looks like. And it's not something that happens overnight. You will forget. You will fall into old habits. You will react and regret and want to rewind. But that's okay. Because every moment you remember, you rebuild. Every time you choose the pause, the breath, the awareness, you get stronger. Detachment isn't a finish line. It's a way of moving through life. It's how you meet pain without flinching, how you face disappointment without collapsing, how you walk through noise without losing your quiet center. In the end, the goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel everything and still act with wisdom. To let your emotions visit, but never let them make your choices for you. To recognize the storm, but not get pulled into it. To understand what hurts you and learn from it instead of being ruled by it. That's detachment, not absence, not indifference, just strength, steady, rooted strength. The kind that doesn't shout, but holds. The kind that lets you breathe deeply, think clearly, and move forward, not from habit, but from truth. Anger often feels justified. It rises quickly, fills your chest, narrows your vision, and convinces you that it's the right response to what just happened, that someone else's words, actions, or attitude crossed a line. But if you look closely, really look, you'll find that most of the time, anger doesn't start in cruelty. It starts in confusion. You don't understand why they acted that way, why they said that, why they suddenly pulled away, lashed out, lied, or ignored you. And in the space where understanding is missing, your mind fills in the gaps, with judgment, with assumptions, with stories that center you as the target and them as the threat. But what if that space didn't have to be filled with fire? What if it could be filled with insight? When you begin to understand what drives someone else's behavior, You take away its power to shake you. You start to see that the sharpness in their voice wasn't about you. It was about the chaos they carry. That the coldness in their silence wasn't rejection. It was fear. That their need to dominate, impress, or mock comes from insecurity, not strength. You stop personalizing behavior that was never personal to begin with. Not because you excuse it, not because it's acceptable, but because you see through it. And once you see clearly, anger loses its grip. Most people aren't waking up in the morning looking for ways to hurt others. They're waking up trying to survive their own mess. Their behavior is often a reflection of internal storms they've never learned to calm. The one who lashes out might be desperate to feel seen. The one who manipulates might be terrified of being abandoned. The one who always needs to be right might feel worthless without control. Understanding this doesn't make the behavior okay, but it makes it easier to meet it without being pulled under by it. Because once you recognize that their chaos belongs to them, you stop making it yours. Socrates once said, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." And it's not a poetic idea, it's a truth most people never slow down enough to absorb. That battle isn't always visible. It's not marked on their face or written in their tone, but it's there, buried beneath habits, defense mechanisms, pride, silence, overcompensation. The problem is, when you don't see the battle, you assume it's about you. You react as if every rude comment is an attack. Every passive-aggressive joke is aimed straight at your worth. But when you understand that pain often dresses itself in armor, your instinct to react softens. This kind of understanding doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. Because now you're responding to what's real, not just what's loud. Now you can choose how to engage or whether to engage at all. You don't get baited into emotional games. You don't need to match their tone or prove your point. You see what's driving them, and you decide what kind of energy you want to meet it with. Sometimes that's compassion, sometimes it's boundaries, but it's no longer reaction, it's choice. And choice is where your strength lives. Carl Jung taught that what we do not understand in others often points to what we have not yet understood in ourselves. So when someone's behavior triggers you deeply, there's usually a lesson there, something unexamined, something unresolved. Maybe it's your need to be respected, or your fear of being unseen, or a part of you that still feels like you have to fight for your place. Understanding others also opens the door to understanding yourself. Because the clearer you see them, the more clearly you begin to see your own wounds, your own reflexes, your own patterns of reaction. Think about how many arguments were simply misunderstandings, how many broken connections came from reacting before pausing to see the full picture. Understanding isn't just a tool, it's protection. When you understand, you don't waste energy on the surface level. You get to the root. You see the fear behind the insult, the insecurity behind the arrogance, the pain behind the anger. And that kind of vision makes you powerful, not in a loud, dominant way, but in a quiet, immovable one. You're no longer shaken by every wave because you've learned to read the water. But this level of understanding takes practice. It requires you to slow down when your instincts say speed up, to observe when your pride says strike, to listen when your ego says speak. It's not about overanalyzing every interaction. It's about choosing clarity over confusion, choosing perspective over projection, choosing to learn instead of lash out. And it doesn't always mean staying in situations that hurt. Sometimes understanding someone means walking away from them, not with bitterness, but with peace. Because you finally understand that their behavior is theirs to carry, not yours to fix. The more you train yourself to look deeper, the less you feel the need to defend. You start to recognize that not everything deserves a reaction, that not every opinion needs to be corrected, that not every cold look needs to be warmed. Some people are simply revealing where they are on their journey. And you're observing, you're learning. And in that learning, you're growing stronger, more centered, less shaken. You become the one who moves with awareness, not impulse. And perhaps the greatest part of understanding is what it unlocks in you. When you stop being triggered, you start becoming free. You begin to carry less resentment, less blame. You open up more space inside, for peace, for clarity, for growth. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop holding grudges. You stop needing revenge. Not because people hurt you less, but because their actions no longer land the same way. You see the story behind their behavior, and you let it pass. Understanding becomes the antidote. It soothes the part of you that used to overreact. It calms the part that used to feel attacked. It strengthens the part of you that used to shrink. It doesn't require you to tolerate disrespect, but it frees you from being disturbed by it. That's what makes it so powerful. It replaces confusion with clarity, clarity with calm, and calm with choice. So when the world tries to pull you into noise, you meet it with vision. When others show you who they are, you don't argue, you observe, because you've learned that their battle isn't yours. Your peace is, and you won't trade it away for anything less than understanding. Most people believe they're in control of their actions, that when they raise their voice, walk away, slam the door, or hit send on that impulsive message, it was a conscious choice. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll see that much of what you call choice is just reaction wearing a disguise. Someone says something sharp, and you snap back before your breath even returns. It happens fast, too fast to be deliberate. That moment, the one between their words and your reaction, is where your power could have lived. But most people never step into it. They skip right over it. They don't even know it's there. That space is called the pause. And if you can master it, your entire life starts to shift. It's a strange thing to notice. That sliver of time, barely a second, where your body starts to tighten, your jaw clenches, your heart races. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything inside you wants to jump, to react, to defend, attack, or explain. But in that space, if you learn to stay still just long enough to notice, something powerful happens. You start to see clearly. The emotion is still there. Anger, shame, hurt. But it's no longer steering. You are. You recognize that you have a choice to feed the fire or to let it burn out on its own, to give someone access to your peace or to guard it. That moment is where real control lives. And it's not easy. The pause feels unnatural at first. You'll want to fill it with words, with action, with movement, anything to escape the discomfort of just feeling. But that discomfort is the training ground. Every time you hold it, even for a breath, you're rewiring your nervous system, teaching your body that intensity doesn't require immediacy, that not every emotional spike needs an external release, that you can feel deeply and still remain calm. And that's not suppression, that's strength. Carl Jung said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness," and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. What that reminds us is that life isn't about avoiding the uncomfortable. It's about learning to stand within it without losing yourself. The pause gives you that balance. It helps you see the situation for what it is, not just what your ego interprets it to be. You stop reacting to what you fear and start responding to what you understand. It's a shift from being on autopilot to being awake. And in that wakefulness, you notice things. You notice the stories your mind tries to tell in the heat of the moment, stories about being disrespected, unappreciated, threatened, stories that often have little to do with reality, and everything to do with your own unhealed patterns. Without the pause, you believe those stories immediately. But with it, you get to question them. Is this actually about now, or is it about something older, something deeper? That's how growth happens, through awareness, not reaction. When you master the pause, you don't become passive. You become precise. You don't lose your voice. You sharpen it. You don't tolerate everything. You just learn not to respond from the first wave of emotion. That first wave is usually the least honest. It's fast, protective, raw. But the truth, the calm, steady truth, comes in the second wave, the one that only arrives when you give it room to speak, and the pause is what makes that room. It's also where your relationships begin to change. People notice when you stop reacting the way you used to, when you don't escalate, when you don't take the bait. Some will feel confused. Some might get louder, trying to pull you back into the old pattern, but others will feel your steadiness and begin to meet you there, because calm is contagious. The way you handle tension teaches people how to treat you, and when you no longer reward chaos with chaos, it starts to die off. But this isn't just about others. It's about how you meet yourself. How many times have you regretted what you said in anger? How many times have you wished you'd waited just a moment longer before acting? That regret. It's your intuition showing you that a pause was needed, that you moved too fast, that you weren't acting from your values, but from your wounds. The pause helps you close that gap, so you don't keep betraying your own sense of integrity for the sake of being right or being heard in the heat of the moment. And there's something humbling in that, because you start to see how often you've been at the mercy of your emotions, how often you've thought you were defending yourself, when really you were defending your ego. That realization doesn't shame you, it frees you. It shows you where your work is, not in perfecting your image, but in practicing your presence. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." The pause is a kind of adversity. It asks you to prove yourself, not to the world, but to your own mind, to prove that you can stay steady when everything inside you wants to run, that you can choose clarity over impulse, stillness over noise. That's not something you declare once. It's something you do again and again until it becomes your way of being. And slowly it does. The more you step into that space, the more natural it feels. Your reactions soften, your presence deepens. You stop being pulled into every storm. You start becoming the calm within it. People notice the difference. But more importantly, so do you. You start to trust yourself more, because you've shown yourself that you don't need to explode to be strong. You don't need to react to be real. You just need to stay long enough in the pause to choose the version of you that's aligned, not just the one that's loud. Mastering the pause isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming emotionally mature. It's not about holding everything in. It's about holding it wisely, letting it rise, letting it speak, but not letting it take the wheel. And with time, you realize that most of what you thought needed a reaction never really did, that most of the battles you fought weren't necessary, that the peace you've been chasing was always hidden in that one simple act, waiting, not because you're passive, but because you're powerful enough to pause. There's a point in this journey where something begins to shift, not loudly, not all at once, but like the quiet cracking of old ice beneath your feet. You realize you no longer feel the same pull to understand every word spoken about you. You stop needing to fix misunderstandings, the questions that used to loop endlessly in your mind. Why did they treat me like that? What did they mean by that comment? Why didn't they value me? They begin to dissolve, not because you found the answers, but because you realized you never needed them. Closure, it turns out, was never theirs to give. It was something you learned to grant yourself the moment you stopped demanding it from people who couldn't even offer you clarity if they tried. And this doesn't mean you've become indifferent or numb. That's not it. In fact, you feel more deeply than before, but differently. You no longer react to every emotion like it's a command. You don't flinch at discomfort. You don't feel the need to explain your silence, your distance, your peace. The world might still swirl with opinions and noise, but it no longer leaks into your sense of self. You've built a kind of quiet within, a home where your worth isn't constantly up for negotiation. You begin to recognize how much of your past suffering came not from what happened, but from your refusal to let it pass without chasing it, analyzing it, or proving something in response. This is what happens when the inner world becomes enough, when your values, your truth, your stillness become so deeply rooted that nothing on the outside has the power to pull you out of alignment. You stop chasing control because you've embodied it. You stop searching for peace because you are it. You stop defending yourself because you finally believe in the life you're living, and the opinions that once haunted you now sound like echoes, faint, far, and unable to touch the foundation you've spent so long building. People may still misunderstand you. They may still project their own wounds onto you, twist your intentions, paint you with brushes dipped in their fears. But you don't move to correct them anymore. You don't feel the urgency to set the record straight. Not because you've given up on being seen, but because you've stopped trying to convince people who were never looking clearly to begin with. Your life no longer bends to the approval of others. And in that freedom, you gain a rare kind of peace, the kind that cannot be taken, only surrendered. And you don't surrender it anymore. There's a freedom in no longer explaining yourself, a freedom in silence, in not needing to be right, in letting others carry their opinions without trying to change them. It's not weakness, it's strength. It's not defeat, it's evolution. You realize that your energy is a currency, and you've wasted too much of it in the past on battles that didn't matter, on trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding, on trying to win wars that only existed in your head. Now you spend that energy building, creating, loving, resting, growing, because peace, once protected, becomes your highest priority. Aristotle once said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." And that includes the thoughts others try to plant inside you. Not every opinion that reaches your ears deserves space in your mind. Not every judgment needs to be unpacked, argued with, or disproved. When someone throws a label at you, you don't wear it. You examine it, and most often, you let it fall to the floor. Because you no longer build your identity from recycled opinions, you build it from something deeper, something quieter, something that doesn't change with moods or moments. This kind of internal freedom doesn't make you distant. It makes you grounded. You become the kind of person who listens more, speaks less, and observes with a patience that comes only from inner clarity. You walk into rooms without needing to dominate them. You exit situations without needing to justify your decision. You let others think what they need to, and you carry on, not from arrogance, but from alignment. Not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you no longer need to perform strength. You are strong, and it shows in the peace you protect. And yes, people will still test you. Not out of malice, but because something in your stillness triggers what they've left unresolved. Your calmness will feel unfamiliar. Your silence will seem like defiance. Your detachment might be mistaken for judgment. But you're no longer responsible for how they interpret your peace. That belongs to them. You've spent enough time trying to make others comfortable with your boundaries. Now you honor them without apology. Because your growth is not up for debate. Eventually you'll notice that the moments which used to consume you now pass through you like a breeze. You feel them, yes, but they no longer stay. They don't latch on. You no longer carry other people's chaos like it's your responsibility to clean it up. You recognize what's yours and what's not. And what's not yours, you let go. Not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. Because carrying what doesn't belong to you isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment. And you've done enough of that in the past. Now, you return to yourself, every single time. To the place that no longer needs fixing. To the voice inside that doesn't scream, but speaks with quiet certainty. To the truth that doesn't demand to be believed, only lived. And in that return, you experience the final freedom. Not just freedom from others, but freedom from your own old self. The self that needed to be liked. The self that needed to win. The self that needed to be heard, even when the room wasn't listening. That self begins to rest. And what rises in its place is something steadier, stronger, and far more at peace. You don't need to fight for peace when you become the source of it, and once the noise outside no longer shakes the quiet inside, you've already won. If this spoke to something deep within you, there's another video waiting on your screen that will take you even further. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.